and a toast to life. Chapter 1: 3 countries, 3 languages, and one little girl. Nobody is ever just a refugee. Nobody is ever just a single thing. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. When I was 4 years old, we, my dad, my mom, and my sister Sonia, lived in a quiet street in Maryland County, Liberia. Our house was a one-story building that had my father's supermarket downstairs while we lived upstairs. My father was one of the many Lebanese men who left Lebanon to start business in West Africa in the 80s. It is a cultural thing for the Lebanese to leave their homes and start businesses in different countries, especially in Africa. So my dad had many relatives living in Liberia and other neighboring countries. My mom met my dad while buying items from his store for a school basketball game. She played basketball for her high school while my dad played in one of the community basketball. My parents ran the shop together, but my mom also supported the family with proceeds from the huge garden behind the house where she planted vegetables, cassava, plantain, bananas, and potatoes, as well as her catering business. Of my earliest memories are of me running around that garden with Sonia. We loved running around the garden, even though she always chased us away so we would not step on her crops. We also played cook with empty cans and made fire with matches and sticks. For instance, we used sand for vegetables. We used the leaves of our mom's garden plants. Our neighbors were other immigrants from Lebanon, Mauritania, and a handful of Liberians. I went to a Catholic school in the morning and returned home to a quiet Maryland county while the rest of the country burned from the battle between Prince John's Independent National Patriotic Front of Liberia and Charles Taylor's National Patriotic Front of Liberia for the control of Monrovia, the Liberian capital. In 1919, Johnson's men executed President Samuel Doe and took control of Monrovia. Our quiet corner of Liberia became heated up. My mom was pregnant at the time with Nabil, my brother. On one of their trips to Maryland County, rebels who came looking looting and looking for supporters of Doe, saw my pregnant mom and asked her to name the baby AK after the AK-47 gun. The next time the rebels came to our house, we ran and hid among the plantain trees behind the house. That was when my dad decided it was not safe for us to stay in Liberia. So we moved to Lebanon. In Lebanon, we lived on the ninth floor of a high-rise building. My father also had a shop, but it was not in the same building. I was enrolled in a primary school and taught in Arabic. I was a bright child and picked the language quickly. The language wasn't the only thing I picked. Chickenpox was around at the time, and I caught it from my seatmates. I came home from school one day, scratching my body, and my mom was alarmed because she immediately knew what it was. If I had it, then Sonia or Nabil could get it for me. I remember laughing as she ran around, trying to tie my hands with socks and keep me from touching my siblings. Aside from the itching from the chickenpox, I did not suffer more serious symptoms. While I recovered, I was left with 3 dark spots on my face, one in the middle of my forehead. People call my Indian mark. She had been in Lebanon for only 2 years when we broke out. It was a quiet day and we were in our apartment when the higher rise building opposite ours crumbled to the ground. Our building vibrated as if it had also been hit by a womb. There was a bunker for residents to hide during bombings. My mom screamed, "Hold your sister while I carry your brother." I ran to the bunker now. Whenever there was a bombing, the lights went out and it was not safe to use the elevator. I went down the flight occasionally. My mom had tried to call my dad when the bombing appeared. My mom had tried to call my dad when the bombing happened, and I could tell she was worried about him. My dad returned thankfully. We should move back to Liberia. I could tell she was worried about him. My dad, my dad returned thankfully. We should move back to Liberia, she said to my mom. Everything is now peaceful. And so we packed our bags again and moved back to Liberia. We moved into our old house. My dad had to restock the shop because the rebels looted it. It was enrolled in the Catholic school. I was enrolled in the Catholic school I attended before we left. But the 2 years I had spent in Lebanon affected me. I was speaking and writing in Arabic. When I wrote in English, I wrote from the right side to the left side of my notebook. My teachers were having none of it. I got teased by the other kids. My parents had hired a home teacher for me. While at school, my teachers were determined to erase Arabic from my mind. They won the battle, and I forgot how to speak or write in Arabic. A life in Arabic. A life in Liberia went back to normal. My parents continued running the supermarket, or my mom maintained her garden behind the house and her catering business. She got bigger and I found her pregnancy curious, as it was the first time I understood what pregnancy meant. On one of their many trips to bury goods for the shop, she went into labor. They returned home with a tiny baby wrapped in blankets, and my mom renounced, "This is your new sister, Nadia." One evening, after my parents have closed the shop for the day and we were preparing to sleep, some people came knocking on our door. At first, my mom thought it was the neighbors who wanted to buy something from the shop. But the knocking persisted. My dad went downstairs to start the conversation. My parents are very friendly. My jovial people. My dad knew so many people because of our shop. He mentioned a cordial relationship with many of them. And my mom was very welcoming. Our home was always filled with cousins, aunties, uncles, nieces, nephews, and anyone who just needed a place to live. My mom opened our doors to them. That night, it was one of my parents' friends who took care to tell my dad to take us out of the country because war was about to break out again. I remember listening to their husband voices from the room I shared with Sonia before my dad returned upstairs. I had I knew it was bad news. Pack a bag, he told us. We are leaving from time in the morning. We could not pack things before the story because we should look suspicious. So my mom packed just a bag for each of us and some food. After packing, my parents went about trying to contact other relatives and get a car for us to travel in. In the morning, Hilos arrived and we all crammed in. With us were my aunt, a family friend, our nanny, my cousin. We left at about 5 a.m. with just a backpack each and some supplies. We drove out without any incident until we got to the border between Liberia and Ivory Coast. There is a large river separating both countries. They could see the river from the car. My mom was telling us we will have to cross with canoes and we must not stand while some rebels appeared in the middle of the road, blocking our car. They were armed with guns and machetes and ordered at us to stop. They pulled the men out of the car and began to harass them for money. My dad did not have enough money on him because our move was impromptu. When he gave them the little he had on him, they began to accuse him of supporting the opposition party. My mom, seeing how they were harassing my dad, cousin and our family friend, ordered us to remain in the car and went to plead with the rebels. She was carrying Nadia, who was wrapped in warm clothes. When she got closer, she recognized one of the rebels who was harassing my dad. He was the boyfriend of one of the many cousins who lived in our house. So he was always in the shop or our house to visit her. "You," she called out to me. "I know you. You've been in my house. You've eaten my food. I've fed you. Why are you doing this to us? Please, let us go. But the man would not budge. He hurried to, to shove her out of the way, but she stood in front of my dad with the baby in her arms. The sight of a pleading woman with a small baby did not deter the rebels. They continued trying to get her out of the way so they could reach my dad, but my mom would not move. Just then, one of them spotted us in the car. The rebels claimed has Nabil was Charles Taylor's son because he had blonde hair like an albino, and ordered us to come out. I was frozen with fear, so it was my cousin who brought me out of the trunk. Years later, when I asked my mom about this, she said she was not scared until she saw the look on the faces of those men when they saw me. Sonia and my teenage aunt. The look had sent a shiver down her spine. The thought that they might want to rape us almost made her pass out. I was 6 and my aunt was in her late teens. My mom was still shedding my dad as she continued begging the rebels. The one she knew said, "Hey, it does not matter if you don't move from your husband's front. I will take potatoes here." My mom did not listen. Maybe she thought he would not do it. But he totally disregarded her and started shooting the ground in between her legs. She jumped up and down, trying to avoid the bullet. Just then, a miracle happened, because it was only a miracle that would have made the government jet bombers arrive at the exact time. The rebels, hearing the sound of the places, ran off. They covered our car with the green leaves and positioned themselves in the car, ready to defend themselves. We ran to a navy plantation to hide. The jet bomber arrived in a few minutes later and hovered around the border. Briefly, the noise from the engine blocked out every other sound. Once the bomber left, my dad carried Nabil. Sonia's hand. Nabil. Once the bomber left, my dad carried Nabil, took Sonia's hand, and we all ran towards the river. We left everything we packed in a car at the border crossing. We saw some of our friends and distant relatives and distant relatives. I saw death face to face. My cousins drowned. Everyone was crying as we arrived at the shore on the Ivory Coast side. We were received by aid workers and joined other refugees in a camp by the border. My parents knew many people in Ivory Coast because they traveled there frequently to buy goods for the shop back in Liberia, as we had relatives there. They tried contacting them so they could help us get out of the camp. There were very few cars coming out from the main cities to the border. After 2 days of trying to reach friends and relatives, a Catholic priest took us in his pickup to a place called Tabu, a small town close to the border. We met one of my dad's cousins there, and he took us to his house. The compound he lived in had 3 two-bedroom apartments, but they were all empty except for the one he lived in with his family. He encouraged my dad to rent the apartment next to him so we could settle in Ivory Coast. My dad agreed, but it was already late in the night and we needed a place to sleep. Our uncle offered us his house for the night, but my mom was not comfortable within that arrangement because their house had 2 rooms. The parents slept in one while their 4 sons slept in the other. Thank you. We will take the house next to you and sleep there tonight. My mom said to him. She asked them to give us clothes and blankets. My mom swept the floor and spread the blankets. I was so tired that I laid on the blanket and fell asleep immediately. I woke up quite suddenly to my dad the shouting. There were snakes in the apartment. My dad killed the snakes, but I could not go back to sleep. I would doze off. I would doze off and jerk awake, afraid another snake will come slithering by. Thankfully, we did not see any more snakes that night. The next day, with the little money my parents hid from the rebels, my father fumigated the house, bought mattresses, and we began setting up our home again. My dad wanted to open a supermarket like the one he had in Liberia, even though he had no money. He shared this idea with one of his cousins, who later introduced him to other Lebanese traders in Ivory Coast. If there is one thing the Lebanese diaspora is known for, it is that they always help each other. They rallied around to raise money for my father, and in less than 1 month, my dad had set up his supermarket in Ivory Coast. My dad's brother in Liberia joined us in Ivory Coast and took the 2-bedroom apartment next to ours. Once again, we lived in peace with my relatives surrounding us and our shop only a few blocks away. Still, the image of my mother jumping up and down as the rebels dig potatoes would remain in my mind for a long time, haunting me. Meanwhile, family pouring in who would come, stay with us a few weeks, and go. Another family would appear. My father's business did so well that he was able to repay his loans, and in less than 1 year, he rented a 5-bedroom apartment. It was just like old times in Liberia. We moved out of the 2-bedroom to the 5-bedroom apartment above our shop and lived there for 9 years. My mom began to cultivate the land behind the house for a garden. She also had a poultry and raised rabbits and guinea pigs. She started a wedding planning and catering business, and the sales of used clothes as well. It was difficult for us to settle into a French-speaking country since we just came from an English-speaking one. Sonia and I attended the refugee school where we were taught in English and French. United Nations officials visited us often. They asked us about the war back in Liberia, how we had escaped, and how easy or difficult it was settling in Ivory Coast. The union officials handled preparations and resettlement of refugees. Many refugees who had escaped the war in Liberia resettled or filed for for political asylum in Western countries. Each time my family applied, our application was always rejected and we were denied asylum so much that we gave up on migrating to the West. Many years later, I was sit in the United States Embassy in Ghana with my mom and son to apply for visas, cleared, and nervous that we would be denied. But we will all get our visas. At a time in history in Ivory Coast, I did not know a time would come when I would be able to travel around the world. The UN officials also gave out supplies with food, drugs, mosquito nets, and other essential items to families who really needed them. Even though we were refugees, we were not treated as such by the Liberians. It felt my dad had been seeing the signs through his business. After closing the shop for the day, he would come up and say business had been bad. Prices were up, essential commodities were becoming scarce, and he could smell a war coming. By then, Liberia had found peace. Everything was calm again, and the economy was budding. My dad then decided to take some money from the shop in Ivory Coast and move back to Liberia to start another business with his brother. When my father and uncle left there for Liberia, I assisted my mom running the shop in Ivory Coast. A few months after my dad left for Liberia, the, super, the superintendent of Tabu, a friend of my dad, called him to come get us out of Ivory Coast because war was coming. He said he was moving his family to Abidjan, but they had space for only 2 people in their truck. My mom was confused. How was she going to squeeze us all in? There was me, Sonia, Nabel, and Nadia, and all the other relatives living with us. By then, I was 16 years old. I had just graduated. I felt confident. I was not as timid as to take Nadia and Nabil and go with the superintendent while Sonia and I would take the bus to Abidjan with my cousin, Kotoko. She kept asking me, "Are you sure? Because what would be the first time I traveled on my own. My mother kept an eagle eye on me, so we never went anywhere ourselves. I assured, I reassured her, just tell me where to get off the bus. We will be fine. My mom was for sales rep of a popular telecommunication company in Ivory Coast. So she gave me a small cell phone and wrote the address and description of our meeting place in Trenchville, Abidjan, as we prepared to leave. We tried to sell off as much goods in the supermarket as possible so we could gather enough money. In a week, with just one backpack each, my mother went to Abidjan with the superintendent while I, Sonia, and Kobo got out on a bus going from Tabo to Abidjan. It was the longest trip I had ever embarked on in my life. We could not carry more than one backpack each, so as not to arouse suspicion. The trip from Tabo to Abidjan went slowly as there were roadblocks and military checkpoints every 15 minutes. Each time we got to a checkpoint, the soldiers could ask everyone to get down, open our bags, and search the bus thoroughly. When we arrived at Dabo, a town before Abidjan, it was too late to continue. We found a roadside hotel and paid for a room so we could spend the night. In the morning, we hired a taxi to La Guerre de Traville, where we reunited with my mom, Nadia and Nabil. Together, we boarded a bus and went to Ghana. The trip to Ghana was easier, simply because my mom was there and I did not have to be in charge. But immediately, the bus driver said, "Welcome to Ghana." In his thick voice, I passed out. I had been so anxious and scared, holding my breath all through the journey. My siblings could not remember the rebels at the Liberia-Ivory Coast border when we crossed many years ago, but I did. Each time we got to a checkpoint, my whole body tensed until the soldiers waved us away. My mom and other passengers in the bus revived me and we went into the first hotel we saw when we arrived in Tema. My mom paid for a room and asked us to go inside. But She went out to look for a cheaper hotel we could move into the next day. The room was lodged in the room we lodged in was spacious and it had a big bathtub. I ran into the bathroom, ran hot water, and literally jumped into the bathroom. I was so excited to see such a huge tub. I started shouting, "I'm floating, I'm floating." And my siblings ran into the bathroom too. These were happy they were happy to see me energetic and were excited because it was our first time seeing a bathtub. To this day, my siblings call me "I'm floating." When they want to tease me, when my mom returned, I was burning with a fever. So my mom took me to the port clinic in Tema, where I was admitted for 2 weeks. My mom, who was always calm and collected, was overwhelmed while I was in the hospital. On her first day in Ghana, after many years, she was alone with one sick child and 3 young children depending on her for their safety. She reached out to her relatives in Ghana to help us find a place to stay. My dad was still in Liberia and he sent us money to that so that we could get a house. After I was discharged from the hospital, we settled in Tema Community 5, a residential area just outside of Ghana's capital, Accra. Tema was the closest city to my mother's Ghanaian relatives, so it was the perfect spot for us. Before we left Ivory Coast, my mother instructed her niece to pack our belongings in the house and send them to Ghana, while she returned to Liberia before war escalated. After we rented a house in Ghana, my mother was reluctant about buying new things in the house. She was optimistic that her niece would send our belongings, clothes, furniture, and kitchen utensils soon, but days became weeks, and weeks stretched into months. Still, she heard nothing from her. When she finally got through to her months later, she said that the same day we left, rebels came to loot our shop and home. All the memories of the 10 years we lived in Tabu were gone. I've been the leader of a talent group in Tabu. We made VHS tapes of our rehearsals and the talent shows we performed in. Old photographs of me and my siblings, our books, my mother's kitchen utensils, all our favorite things were all gone. So once again, We began our lives with the content of our backpacks. The people of Community 5 in Tema were so welcoming. They made us forget we were starting over again. They showed us places to get mattresses, furniture, pots, and kettles for less than half the price. It was in Ghana that I finally found lasting refuge for war. Chapter 2. Knock knees, bushy hair, and a half smile. You are imperfect, permanently and inevitably flawed, and you are beautiful. I'm a bloom. I am one of those people who have always known that what they wanted to be. I wanted to be a star from when I was a child. I told everyone who cared to listen about how I would grow up to become a superstar. All I knew about superstars I got from the stash of fashion magazines in our house. I was always excited each time my parents had to travel to livestock to restock our supermarkets because they will return with old and current issues of fashion magazines and CDs of famous musicians. I laughed up, daydreaming of the time I too will become a star. At that time, like every teenage girl, I adored the musician on TV. Britney Spears and Celine Dion were at the top of my list. I absolutely loved Celine Dion. I wanted to be like her and sing like her. So I wrote down the lyrics to her French songs and practiced them while singing along to our CD player. Without intending it, mimicking Celine Dion made my ability to speak and write French better. My parents, seeing my love for Celine Dion and the positive impact her songs were having on my French, continued buying me her CDs while I continued fascinating, fantasizing of a time when I would be a big star, just like her. Besides, everyone said I looked like her. I would stand in front of the mirror with a clipped photo of Celine Dion, looking for similarities until I was absolutely convinced we looked alike. I believed that one day we would do a song together. But there was only one glitch. I was overly shy, timid, and very conscious of my body. Outside our house, I did not talk much. At school, I loved sports. I participated in track and field games and loved soccer and basketball just like my mom. But each time I had to change into the compulsory sports and sleeveless jerseys which serve as our sportswear, my classmates would laugh at my legs. They called me Juju Knock Knees. I was gangly, as tall as most of my classmates, even though I was the youngest. This made them doubt me when I told them how old I was. they will snigger or smirk, and the more direct ones will say, "Juju, please stop lying." When I could not take the teasing from my eyes, from my classmates anymore, I quit playing sports in school. I figured if I did not have to change into our sportswear, people would forget I have knock knees. I joined the drama and singing group where they did they did not have to change into shorts. Nobody teased anyone. Plus, they seemed like they had fun. Joining joining whatever she had the time, whenever she had the time, she would make videos of us rehearsing at home and performing a talent show. Videos of us rehearsing at home or performing at talent shows. I was convinced I would become a superstar, so I would need to show people old videos of me as a young artist. The tapes were some of the many valuables we lost in Ivory Coast when we fled the Civil War. Another thing that made me love Celine Dion was her love story. I read about it in an exclusive interview in one of the magazines my father bought for me. I read it over and over, and like a typical teenage girl, I convinced myself that my turn will come when a rich older man will find me and make me a star. After all, I look like Celine Dion, so why not? My rich old man did not come till many years later. My knock knees were not the only imperfections in my body that made me hide myself from view. In my head, my teeth were badly crooked because one of my incisors looked like it wanted to jump out of my mouth. In reality, the tooth just slightly overlapped the other, but I was so conscious of it. It was all I ever saw when I smiled at myself in the mirror. I did not want people to see my teeth and add it to list of things they tease me about. So I learned to smile with one hand stylishly covering the crooked teeth. When I practice my modeling walks, poses and smiles, I stretch my face into a tight smile, showing no teeth. I learned to walk so people will not notice my knees. The non-conforming body parts were all I saw about myself. So when people, especially men, marveled at how beautiful I was, I thought they were lying. Can't you see my teeth? Can't you see my legs? I would almost say, if it was my classmates, I concluded that they were mocking me. I did not stand up for myself during those days. That was Sonia's job. and she took it seriously. Sonia was always ready to fight my battles. I avoided confrontations, stepped away from them like they were landmines. I found every available excuse to escape my physical education classes until one day I had no excuse to escape. Our class was split in two and we were supposed to play football. One team against the other. Everyone had to be involved. I changed into my team's shorts and jersey and walked onto the field. It was really more of a large sand patch in the middle of our school compound. But we called it our football field. We began playing and nobody seemed to notice me. Soon I became oblivious of my legs and began to enjoy the game. Until I scored a goal against the other team. The girls from the other team hated me, and one of them, the leader of the pack, who was participating from the bench, pointed at my legs and laughed. This Juliet and her knock-knees, Juju knock-knees, she laughed. It was as if the spectators and players on the field became newly aware of me. Every eye turned to my legs. People began to